Welcome everyone back to weekly weather updates, and in today's video we're going to have the latest from the live radar, run for the latest UKV, have a look at the precipitation and the temperature over the next 5 days, as we still have fairly unsettled conditions over the next few days. As you can see from the live radar, another big band of rain is moving through on Tuesday night, and we are going to see more spells of rain throughout this working week. However, later on into the weekend, the rain will become more confined to the west, and that's because high pressure is starting to build to our east and our south, and it is going to slowly squeeze away that lower pressure, and we are going to see less rain as we progress into the final few days of April. Now, of course, with that high pressure to our east, low pressure to our west, it is going to encourage a southerly wind, and that means, as we'll see from a lot of the longer range charts, that we are likely to go warmer as we head towards the end of April and start of May. Now, some runs like the GM are producing some properly hot conditions. It was a proper furnace type run yesterday from the GM, where I didn't actually say this in the video, but it was predicting record breaking temperatures on the 30th of April. Our top temperature ever in the UK in the month of April is 29.4 degrees, and the GEM run yesterday on the afternoon of the 30th of April was showing temperatures getting towards 30-degree range. So would be a record-breaking run yesterday from the GM. Once again today, it is very warm, maybe not quite as hot, but another very warm run, and other runs are similar, but there is still quite a bit of uncertainty. As we progress into early May, though, we aren't going to see warm conditions hanging around for too long. It does look likely that cooler weather will return, but in the meantime, there is quite a high chance now that we do see at least a few days of something resembling summer. So do remember, if you enjoy the videos, which do like and subscribe. And if we start now on the live radar, you can see the big wall of rain that is moving in from the west at the moment. Now, we'll move through pretty quickly in the coming hours. That will, for most, not last more than a few hours. But, most importantly, it is moving through overnight. Now, I'm recording this around 8 p.m, so unfortunately, this afternoon and this early portion of the evening, it has been raining quite heavily through the Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland, parts of Wales and southwest England. But for the majority of England and Scotland, the heaviest rain is going to fall overnight when most people are asleep. So yes, lots of heavy rain to come, but for most, you might not even think it has occurred. There'll be a few puddles out in the morning, maybe a bit of lingering rain in the Far East, but generally speaking, for most, this rain will be sweeping through the overnight hours. Now, to look at the temperatures this evening, temperatures are still, not amazing for the time of year. They're not terrible either, around average. In the sunshine, feeling fairly warm, but as soon as you get a bit of a shade, a bit of wind picking up, it does feel still fairly cold. But as I said, in the next few days, that will progressively disappear. It will become warmer and warmer as we progress into the final few days of the month. Now, to head over to the latest UKV now, you see that big wall of rain sweeping through tonight, bringing some really heavy stuff for much of England and Wales, but as I said, mostly falling in the overnight hours. Now, it could just about linger with some thicker cloud and some lighter drizzle and rain into the mid-morning period of Wednesday, but generally speaking, it's cleared completely by lunchtime, just leaving a few showers and a bit of thicker cloud behind. Progressively through Wednesday, the wind will veer to more of an easterly for a time, as we do see a brief ridge of higher pressure. But low pressure will return from the west once again as we progress through Thursday, but importantly, it comes up against a wall of higher pressure that's building towards our east. And what that means is this band of precipitation makes very slow progress eastwards and makes very little stalls out in the Irish Sea before disintegrating away through Friday into Saturday. So already signs that the pressure is rising and the high pressure to our east is starting to take over. And progressively into the weekend, that becomes more and more apparent when these bands of rain really start to struggle to get into the onshore parts of Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland there. Now, if you look at the pressure, you can see the pressure is building towards our south and southeast. And again, if we look at the upper air temperatures, nothing too warm at this stage, but it is slowly climbing up more towards the mid-single digits as we progressively turn a little bit warmer. It's the next couple of days beyond that. That's where we could draw some proper warmth. 28th, 29th, 30th, into the first couple of days of May. Now, to look at the temperatures as we progress into Wednesday, not great. if we're being completely honest, yes, the heavy rain has cleared, but still some thicker cloud and some dribs and drabs of lighter precipitation. As we progress into Thursday, temperatures again not going to be particularly great, hovering again around the mid-single digits. Into Friday, progressively improving for some, but still mid-teens. And into Saturday, again struggling in places, but a few more 16, 17s there. And into Sunday, improving quite considerably, and by the middle of the afternoon could even be up 20 to 21 degrees. You can see how quickly it changes from struggling around the mid-teens Thursday, Friday to Sunday. Suddenly large portions of England, high teens, if not into the low 20s, and we would expect that sort of trend to continue in the subsequent days. Could be looking at quite widely low to mid-20s as we do progress into the following working week. Now, if you head over to the latest GFS now, you can see low pressure continue to coming in off the Atlantic at the moment. It progressively becomes less and less predominant, and we do see high pressure building in over the top of us and to our east for the early part of next week. Now, this encourages a southerly wind, and you can see here from the latest GFS, it does draw up some warm air for a time. Now, it isn't anything ridiculously warm, it's slightly above average, and it is pleasant, sunny, and probably fairly warm. If we do put on those temperatures by afternoon, looking around 20 degrees, a couple of degrees either side for much of next working week. So warm, above average, but nothing too remarkable, for it does start to drop off. So GFS is optimistic, but it's nothing too remarkable. It's a warm, late April, early May day. You can see subsequently the high pressure does push northwards, and it does start to encourage a bit of an easterly flow. So that's not going to be terrible, but it is going to be a little bit cooler, and we would expect to see fresher air moving in from the east, and it would turn cooler once again. And no, we would not be seeing 20 degrees in this sort of scenario. Temperatures will be dropping back down towards the mid to low teens. So yes, it is much warmer to end April and start May, but we're not expecting this to be a massive pattern change. It is a brief blip as we start to see the reorientation of the high pressure, low pressure, as it does look like the high pressure will return to our north. So we'll have to see exactly how it does play. It all depends on the strength of the winds from the south and how tight those isobars will be. But at this stage, it is looking like we're going to see a good few days of pleasant conditions next week. Now, the GM, as I've said multiple times, both today and in the past few videos, has been the most optimistic run. And once again today, it is very, very warm. You can see the high pressure building into our south and our east into the weekend. And then the high pressure fully builds in around Monday, Tuesday next week, and it pulls up a far-fetched southerly wind. If we watch and follow those isobars, they go all the way back to the Mediterranean and North Africa. And you can see the air is getting drawn that way as well. Now, yesterday it was ridiculously warm, and once again today it is another very warm run. Maybe not quite as hot as yesterday's run, but nonetheless, we are looking at mid-20s in this sort of scenario, maybe even warmer than that. If we look at Monday, like the GFS, it's around the 20-degree mark. We look at Tuesday, look at this, suddenly we're looking at 25, 26. If we progress to Wednesday, maybe 26 to 28, maybe even an isolated 29. So again, that would push the all-time temperature record for April. So not quite as hot as the run yesterday, but nonetheless still ridiculous upper air temperatures. Progressively that warmth does dissipate away as we head into early May, and we go back towards more average temperatures into the mid to high teens. So GM once again pretty ridiculous, with a very warm hot air mass moving in, and then similar to the GFS, it does actually veer to more of an easterly, so it would turn cooler subsequently there. So I don't know if this is just the GM is overdoing the southerly wind, or perhaps it's sort of seeing a much larger air mass to our south, but for whatever reason, the GM is really promoting a very warm, if not hot, late April pattern. And it lasts all the way into early May. Now, unfortunately, it is the week. It's not into the weekend, so unlikely that, it'd be better if it was a weekend when people have got time off work and things like that. It does look like this will probably be kind of Monday through to Thursday. But nonetheless, I think we'd all agree that some nice, warm, sunny conditions can't really beat that. Now, if you finally compare to the latest ECMWF, probably very similar, high pressure building over the top of us and to our east, and once again encouraging more of a southerly flow. It's nowhere near as strong as a southerly flow, and the air mass to our south is nowhere near as warm, so it's pleasant. Upper air temperatures maybe just about getting towards 10 degrees, but eventually, similar to the other runs, colder north or northeasterlies do return. So ECMWF in strong agreement, especially with the GFS, warm, southerly or southeasterly for a time, but nothing more remarkable than that. No 25 to 30 degrees like the GM, maybe 22, 23, but nothing too much warmer than that. So GM's still a little bit out there, and it will be quite unfortunate if we don't see something closer to that. I doubt we'll see 30 degrees, but definitely something around the mid-20s I think is a real possibility. We'll just have to wait and see whether these more moderate runs like the GFS and the ECMWF are correct, whether it's the GM that's correct, which I doubt at this stage, or I think more likely scenario it's somewhere in between. Now, to finish by looking at the latest ensembles, you can see we are slightly below average at the moment, cool and unsettled, but progressively over the next few days, later on this week, we go above average and we just go on a steady upwards trend, and we're well above average for the final couple of days of April and start of May. But it isn't a particularly long peak. It's 2 or 3 days, maybe 4 or 5 if we're lucky, and then we're back down to average. And there's a strong agreement we're back down to average or even below average. Precipitation picks up a little bit, not massive amounts, but probably an increase in showers. This follows the trends of lower pressure at the moment, higher pressure builds in, and then potentially a bit of lower pressure when that southerly wind arrives. There is the risk of some storms, and then longer term, eventually, pressure does drop once again. If you look at the 2 meter temperatures, again, steady upwards trend towards the low 20s, and then a downwards trend once again. And we'll probably be able to see this quite well on the dew points here. Slowly increasing from mid-single digits, maybe towards the double digits, and then lowering once again. So it doesn't look like a massively humid southerly wind arriving, which is a positive. Wouldn't feel too oppressive out there, but definitely a little bit of a rise and then a drop once again. Again, only a few degrees deviation, but it makes all the difference this time of year. And then finally, if we compare it to the latest ECMWF, again, very similar to the GFS, big upwards trend, a peak around the 29th or 30th of April, and then a slow drop-off, an even slower drop-off than the GFS, back towards average or below average, precipitation remaining fairly moderate. Now you can see the GEM is very different. Look at that big spike around the 30th to the 2nd of May. Not by itself, though. The operational run has support from about a quarter to a third of its ensemble. So it's definitely something within the GEM coding that is producing this overwhelmingly warm and hot signal. GFS, east of the F, getting to around the 10 degree mark at 850 HPA, but these runs getting towards the 15 degree mark. And I know 5 degrees doesn't sound that different, but that's the difference between 21, 22 degree highs and potentially 28, 29 degree highs, or pushing those sort of temperatures. So we'll have to wait and see which run wins out. As I said, I think the most likely scenario is somewhere in between, but there is a chance the GM is correct. And if the GM is correct, then yeah, we could be in for a really warm and hot end to April. So anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you again for another video soon.